Mark chapter 8. 4 verses of reading tonight, starting with verse number 22. And he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand, and he led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. And after that, he put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly. I have a very familiar scripture reading tonight that we've all heard. And when we read this familiar passage, we at first glance, we see the obvious fact that Jesus restores a blind man's sight. And while this healing appears to happen very quickly over the reading of these 4 scriptures, a deeper look at this passage, and it confirms that this isn't the case at all. They brought him to Jesus. Jesus took and led him away. And then Jesus touched him. And while we know that our healing, while we know that our answer, while we know that our need can happen immediately if God desires, the reality is most of the time it happens through a process, as this one did. And this can be problematic. It can be problematic because when we want or need something, we tend to want it now. It's our human nature. And if we have to wait, we tend to get weary, restless, impatient, and sometimes we even give up during this waiting process. And tonight, I've come to encourage someone to just hold on. I've come to encourage someone to be patient. God has a plan. And I'd like to preach, teach, whatever we're going to roll out with this, and just say and speak for just a moment this thought: patience in the process. Tom Brady, who played in the NFL, was inarguably the greatest and most accomplished player that the league has ever known. And I understand that some here today may know his name, and others wouldn't know him if he walked through the back doors. But he played professionally for 23 years, earning millions and millions of dollars, and he's known all over the world. Statistically speaking, most players never win one Super Bowl. Brady, however, would go on to win 7 of them. With multiple league and championship MVP awards to his credit, he holds just about every individual record for a quarterback. And out of respect of time, it will not allow me to mention them all, but it goes without saying that Brady will be a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer when the time comes. However, Tom Brady's stardom and rise to fame as the greatest player of all time was not something that happened instantaneous. But it came through a process that when looked at hardly represents the path of a superstar. And when you look back before he became the decorated icon that the world knows now, he began playing his football in high school, where he never started a game until his junior year. Now, for any current and former athletes that we have in the house tonight, you know there are always people that just make it look easy. People who seemingly just show up. People who don't have to practice or even think about sports, and yet when they show up, there's no doubt they've got it. They've got it. Or perhaps, we'll go a different direction, or perhaps they wasn't as talented as they told everyone they was, and everyone knew it. And perhaps they had the right last name. Perhaps they seemingly had the right connections. But either way, they seem to always be the first one that's looked at. The first one chosen. The one that everybody thought at the time would surely be the one to make it to the top. And then there was the Tom Brady's of the world. The Tom Brady's who didn't possess none of these things starting out. He didn't have a big last name. He didn't possess that it factor early on. But it was his consistent hard work during high school. It was his never quit determination that proved to be good enough to get him a few college offers. As you may know, he went on to play for the University of Michigan, where once again he didn't play much. In fact, he would set the bench most of the time starting out. Getting reps and honing his skills in practice while serving as the backup quarterback for his first 2 years in college. But over his final 2 seasons, he would go on to be the starting quarterback. But once again, it's worth noting that it didn't just happen as most people would think. As even then, he narrowly beat out his teammate for the position. Enduring this process that he no doubt thought would be a different one during his time with Michigan, Brady still did not quit. But he took the opportunities that he was given, and he continued to press forward to get better, knowing that he hadn't reached his pinnacle yet. Entering the 2000 NFL draft, Brady was hardly looked upon as a surefire, can't-miss player. While players on his team and players from other teams were getting selected before him, Brady sat there. And he waited for his name to be called in what probably seemed like an eternity. Finally, the call came, and he went on to be selected in the 6th round by the New England Patriots with the 199th pick. Now, just for reference, for the non-football fans, I know my wife's going, please hurry. There's only 7 rounds in the NFL draft, and only 250 players taken, meaning that he was near the bottom, and just 51 picks away from not even being selected. Understand that Brady did not have the last name. He didn't have the athletic build. He didn't possess the desired measurables. He didn't have the great college stats. Many scouts even reported and said that he was average at best. Even with the Patriots, Brady once again served as the backup for his first year. And it wasn't until his second year that he would enter the game due to the starting quarterback getting injured. And this would be the chance and opportunity that would finally come that introduced Tom Brady to the world. Players and doubters up to this point had come and gone, some never making it, some never panning out. But Brady, knowing that he had paid the price with his hard work, and while what he was expecting wasn't immediate, while he was frustrated at times, he stayed the course and he remained patient, committed, and faithful during the process. I share this story, Pastor, this true story, to not to try to elevate a man or the Patriot team from that Sodom, Boston, where my son lives now. But because I am not a Patriots fan, and I am not a Tom Brady fan. But the man did his job. He did his thing. But I've shared this story to help shed some light on the fact that even when things don't go our way, that even when we get frustrated with the process, that even when we don't get what we want and when we expected it, that even when the enemy comes in like a flood trying to convince you that the process isn't worth the wait, that it's not time to give up, that it's not time to quit, that it's not time to throw in the towel, that we must remember that the race is not to the swift, but to he that endures to the end, and that we must remember that God has us going through a process for a reason, and that your delay does not mean your denial, but hold on to his word that tells us not to be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. And so it is in our reading tonight of Mark chapter 8. This story reminds us, while Jesus often healed instantly, there will be times that our answer will come through a process. And let me encourage someone that's here tonight by saying that just because you're going through a process, it does not mean that you've done anything wrong. Just because you're going through a process, it doesn't mean that there's a problem with your faith or your faithfulness. And I'm going to blow somebody's mind with this one, but just because that you're going through a process, it does not mean it's always the enemy's fault. But you're going through the process because God has you going through steps and stages of his reasoning before your answer comes. And I realize, Brother Copeland, that this idea of having to go through a process, it goes against what we often teach and preach about in our churches today. That God is always a right now God. But when you reflect back on it and you begin to really think about it, there were times when the need didn't happen when you expected it. The healing didn't happen on your schedule. The answer that you were seeking did not come as fast as you would have liked. And let me just say that while I do believe that God can answer a prayer immediately, that God can still heal the sick instantly, and that God can fulfill a promise in the now, there are times when we come to get prayed for, and if we're being completely honest, we walk right back to our pew still holding on to that sickness, still holding on to that need, still holding on to that hurt. Or that God speaks a promise for something in your life or something in your family or within your own personal ministry, and yet you still haven't seen the fulfillment of that word, and you wonder if it's ever going to come. And it's to those people I come to speak to tonight, that even though God doesn't answer you instantly, you're still sitting here and you're waiting on that fulfillment of that word that he gave you. I tell you to stand firm on his promises. He's still God. He's still the Lord of Lords. He's still the King of Kings. And he is faithful to his word. Now, we can get a little crazy. Before you jump to conclusions and start thinking I fell off the wagon and I bumped my head and I'm up here speaking some type of heresy, I want you to reach back and recall for just a moment. And while you know that he did answer your need, he did answer your prayer, he did heal your body, he did fulfill that promise, that despite your faith, it didn't happen instantaneously or in the now. But that answer came the next day. That answer came the next week. It came to pass the next month, or maybe even the next year, but it did come. Let me throw this thought in for anyone still doubting or struggling, trying to process this thought that God sometimes isn't instant. Think about it this way. That if God always answered immediately or instantaneously, then how could he ever vindicate our faith? How could he ever do it? In fact, I I heard it said this way. I said this way, I'm going to say it. Boy, y'all going to think I'm really lost it. We may not make it past this one here. But if God always responded instantly when we ask for something, then there wouldn't be a need for faith. There wouldn't be a need for faith. There wouldn't be a need for it. I seen about 3 of y'all elbowing the person next to you and saying, yep, he done went and bumped his head. But when we hear this, we're going, now wait a minute. Let me process what you're saying here. I agree with what you're saying. But let me see if this word lines up with what you're saying about having faith and not receiving it instantly. But the reality of it is, we teach and preach and testify about the same thing of what I just said all the time. And we don't even realize that we're saying the same thing when we quote Hebrews 11:1. When Paul was talking to the church, he said what? He said that faith is the substance of things hoped for. Not right now, not seen right now, not given right now, but hoped for. And the evidence of things that you what? Can't see. Things that you can't see. So let me help someone tonight that's still waiting on that healing, someone that's still waiting on that promise, someone that's still waiting on that blessing, someone that's still waiting on that promised word over your life to come to pass. Keep the faith. Understand that the process is part of the miracle. And what we need to do is to get an understanding that just because you're going through the process doesn't mean that God doesn't know where you're at. It doesn't mean that God isn't still working on your situation, but instead He's shaping you and He's molding you for a time. And just because it hasn't happened does not mean that it's not going to happen. Stand firm on that word. Trust that He will not abandon you and that He will see you through to that fulfillment of that promise. All throughout the 4 Gospels, we see instances of Jesus performing the various acts of healing, with some of His miracles and accounts being recorded for us several times, each being told from a different vantage point within the different Gospels. Yet there are other miracles recorded for us only once, unique to the Gospel of which it is written. And within the Gospel of Mark, we find one of these unique miracles that's recorded in detail with the healing of this blind man. This account of Jesus healing him is not only rare because it's only written about once, but it's also the only miracle that involved the process that Jesus performed within the New Testament. And when you read the book of Mark, it records Jesus performing this impressive array of healing miracles within its pages that often happened instantly or immediately. And while Mark in his book records some 19 miracles and efforts to assert the fact that Jesus served a hurting humanity, his accounts of these immediate healings and miracles seem to deliver the point that Jesus' time on earth was short. From Peter's mother-in-law, the man with the unclean spirit, the leper, the paralytic, to the man with the withered hand, the woman with the issue of blood, and the daughter of Jairus. Each miracle being described as being done instantly. Right then, or in some verses it said that it happened immediately or straightway. Mark 1:31, Jesus stopped by Simon's house where his mother-in-law lay sick, and Jesus took her by the hand and lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her. Mark 1:42, the Bible speaks of a man with leprosy that knelt before Jesus asking to be healed, and as soon as Jesus said, I will, the Bible says immediately the leprosy departed. Mark 2:12, Jesus was in the house teaching to a crowd, and a man with palsy had to be lowered through the roof. Jesus told him to arise and take up thy bed, and immediately the Bible says that he went forth. But within this book of immediate and instant needs, miracles, and healings that was going on, we find in our reading tonight in Mark chapter 8 a situation that did not happen immediately. And this was, in fact, the only time that we read in this writings of Mark that a need did not happen as expected. It did not happen immediately, but it happened through a process. And the truth be known, just because we think that we've arrived and we believe that God owes us something, or if we have a need, or if we're going through something, that our answer should happen now. And again, I'm going to reiterate the point that I'm not saying that He won't. But regardless of our status inside the church or outside the church, there will be times it will come through a process. None of us are exempt from the process, steps and stages that God will have us going through at times. We look throughout the Bible and we'll find there are many examples from God anointing David long before he came king. Joseph endured years of imprisonment before the fulfillment of his God-given promise. Abraham had to wait years before he had a son. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before leading the Israelites to the promised land. Peter went through stages of transition before fully embracing the change that God was making. And anytime we're going through this process and we're struggling, we need to remind ourselves of this passage in Mark to remind us of how He works sometimes. But I want us to look at it again tonight to help us appreciate the steps along in this process, to try and help us bring to light and appreciate the hidden blessings that are tucked in that this blind man went through while waiting on God to do His work. The first thing that we need to do is appreciate those that were willing to minister to this man. As we found in verse 22, it said they brought this man to Jesus. And this is the beauty and power of true ministry that I feel like gets overlooked a lot of times. The nameless or anonymous they, that the Bible doesn't give their specific names. It doesn't give them recognition or credit. It just said that they brought this man to Jesus. And you see, the anonymous they aren't concerned with having their name called out publicly. The anonymous they aren't serving just so they can be recognized or go to lunch with pastors so they can be told how great they are. The anonymous they aren't concerned with stirring the pot and constantly criticizing. The anonymous they are more concerned with being a difference maker. The anonymous they are more concerned with serving and helping others. The anonymous they are more concerned with the restoration of others. Read it again. It said they brought this blind man to Jesus, and then he received his healing. And this is crucial because what it tells us is that we need to be thanking God every day for the anonymous days in our life. The anonymous they who serve faithfully in our churches. The anonymous they who are calling our names out in prayer even when we don't fill out a prayer request. The anonymous they who aren't more concerned with making a name for themselves. The anonymous they who don't mind working out of the spotlight or behind the scenes because their heart's desire is to love, to serve, and to help people. And just like in this passage, they know how to find Jesus even when we can't. Hear me. Oftentimes, the best servants are the ones who serve, and you never hear their names. You never hear their names. And while they never brag about it or need their names in the flashing lights outside of the marquee, their whole ministry is witnessing and bringing people to Jesus. Their whole ministry is soul winning. Their whole ministry is giving a Bible study. Their whole ministry is working these altars. Their whole ministry is driving a Sunday school bus to pick up kids or picking up someone that doesn't have transportation that needs a ride to church. Their whole ministry is teaching a Sunday school, to keep teaching a bunch of kids, investing their time to study and teach them in efforts to keep them rooted. that living for God is the most important thing they'll ever do. Their whole ministry is having a burden to go out into this world where you and I usually won't want to go to. We don't want no part of that. And to tell someone about this man named Jesus. And I know that we stand here tonight and we perhaps don't want to admit it, but I dare say that you and I, we're only here because of the anonymous they in our lives that helped us along the way. Someone that was there that helped lead us because we couldn't help our own selves. And we need to appreciate the anonymous they in our lives. If you're not standing right now, you need to stand up, clap your hands, and thank God for the anonymous days that were in your life. Listen, they're not anonymous. You keep clapping your hands. They're not anonymous, but I'm going to say, Pastor, thank you, Brother Carline. Thank you, Darren Riddick. Thank you, Brother Winfrey, if you're watching right now, because it was men like these men and many others who took an old boy that walked through those back doors, parked himself on a pew, and these men come out and would speak. The anonymous they that helped me along the way when I couldn't help myself. We need to be thankful. My God. Lord, I thank you. We thank you for him, God. We thank you for him, God. Our Lord. Secondly, you've got to agree to follow. You've got to agree to follow. You see, this passage says the first thing they did was brought the blind man to Jesus. And then it says that Jesus took him by the hand and led him out of town. Now, I want you to get this. They brought this man to Jesus so that Jesus could touch him. That's what it said. Perhaps expected to see if it would happen right then, but instead it says that he takes him by the hand and he leads him away. Understand, when we bring someone to Jesus, it's not for us to dictate when or how he chooses to touch them. This passage says that he was blind and could not see. And Jesus takes him by the hand and leads him away. He led him away while he was blind. He led him away while he was blind. He led him away even though he couldn't see. Listen, it didn't say that he restored his sight and then let him away. Didn't say that. It says he led him away while he was still blind, giving us a great example of what Paul meant in 2 Corinthians 5 and 7 when it said that we walk by faith and not by sight. He said that I need you to walk with me even though you can't see me. I need you to walk with me even though you're still blind. It should give us a greater insight that during your process, you're going to have to learn to walk with him before you receive what you're needing. No, my answer didn't come right now. No, it didn't happen instantaneously, but that's okay because I walk by faith and not by sight. So even when I can't see it, I'm going to walk with him. Even when I don't feel it, I'm going to keep on walking. Even when I don't hear his voice, I'm going to keep on walking. Even though I don't know when it's going to happen, I'm going to keep on walking. Even though I don't know when it's going to happen, I'm going to keep on walking. But he takes him by the hand and he takes him away, the Bible said, from those that brought him there. He led him away. And Jesus has him walk with him while he was still blind. And this man doesn't realize it, that Jesus is actually doing him a favor because he's from Bethsaida. You're saying, Brother Loving, what does it matter where he's from? If you read Matthew chapter 11, verse 20 and 22, you'll find that Jesus actually rebukes or denounces Bethsaida because the people wouldn't repent. They wouldn't repent. So when we read that this blind man was from Bethsaida, and that Jesus takes him away by the hand and leads him away, it wasn't just to get him away from the people. It wasn't just so they could have some privacy, but Jesus was leading him away from his past that was cursed. Which tells us that this man couldn't see that he was in a cursed situation. He wasn't aware of it. He couldn't see that Jesus took him by the hand and led him away from a cursed situation that was behind him. And what we need to do is thank him tonight for leading us out of some bad situations that we were in our own lives and we didn't even know it. Thank him tonight because he got you out of some bad situations that you were in. Bad situations before that situation got a hold of you. Thank him tonight that he took you by the hand and he led you to a better place with him. Thank him tonight because when you look back and you see where he brought you from, that he led you out of that addiction, that he led you out of that situation, that he led you out of that life of sin, that he led you out of that anxiety, hopelessness, and that depression. And you can stand here now and you can thank him and proclaim with a testimony, when I think of the goodness of Jesus and all that he's done for me. And so if Jesus begins to pull at you, you better go. You better go. You better follow, because he could be trying to get you out of some things that you can't even see that you're in right now. And when you decide to follow, just like in this passage, it may involve you leaving those people that you've been walking with. Let's just get real. It may involve you having to leave some things behind. It may involve leaving doubt and unbelief that you've been surrounded by, and be willing to follow where he leads, even if it involves going through this process. When you look into the Gospels, the New Testament, you'll see that Jesus encountered several blind men, Brother Sharp. And the interesting thing is that each of them were healed and received their sight in a different way. Matthew 9:29, there was 2 blind men and they received their sight when Jesus touched them. Matthew 12:22, this blind man received his sight by merely being in the presence of Jesus. Mark 10:52, Bartimaeus received his sight by the spoken word. One got his healing by a touch. One got his sight by a presence, and one got his sight by a word. But the man in our reading today of Mark 8:23 said he received his sight with spit. Same problem, but a different process. So you and I can't stand here and tell someone how God's going to bring them through it, because how he did it for you may not be how he does it for me. You see, some of you got your blessing when he touched you. Some of you got your miracle by being in his presence. Some of you got your healing when you heard his word. And if we can just be real tonight, let's just be really real tonight. Pastor, can we get real tonight? There was some of us that God had to reach way down for. Some of us that God had to reach way down there. And if we can just be real into some places that we don't want to talk about right now when we've got our suit and a tie on, but God had to reach way down for some of us and reach some of us. And to get what I had to get, God had to spit on me. God had to spit on me. Let me get over here for a minute. God had to spit on me because of some bad things that he brought me through, and some bad things that he brought you through, and some bad things that we don't want nobody to know about, but he did it. But the text says that Jesus spit on his eyes, and then he asked him if he could see. Now, I want us to really understand this point here, but he asked him if he could see, and the man said, yes. He said, yes, I see men as trees walking. And understand that as soon as Jesus spit and touched his eyes, this blind man said, yes, I can see. This should tell us that the spit worked. And please don't dismiss this, because the man said, I see men. Is that what he said? I see men. And that proves he got his miracle. Now watch this. But the ass tree walking was the problem. What did it say in verse 24? It said, and as he looked up, he said, I see men as trees walking. Which meant Jesus had to touch him again. That's what it meant. Jesus didn't have to touch him again for sight. He didn't have to touch him again for sight. Jesus touched him again because this time, Jesus touched him for focus. Because when he touched him the first time in verse 24, it worked. But when we read verse 25, it says Jesus had to touch him again. And for some of us that have walked in here tonight, while we may have received our sight, the deeper problem for us is that we've been satisfied serving God with a blurred vision. Some of us have gotten comfortable walking around with blurred vision. But tonight, some of us have come in here. God needs to touch us again so that he can fix our focus. God needs to touch us sometimes again, not because we can't see, Pastor, but so he can put us in focus for what he really wants in your life, what he really wants to do, what he really wants you to be for him. I need to get back into the house of God. I need to get back to where I need to be. I need to get back to my purpose because my focus is off. My focus is out of whack. It's not in line. And the sad thing about our churches and our people today, and I'm not trying to be mean or heavy with this here, is that we've gotten content. We've gotten content and we've gotten comfortable and we think it's the norm to serve God out of sight and out of focus. That's the problem. That's the problem. And we're missing the bigger picture of what God has for our life. So Jesus didn't touch this man the second time because the first time didn't work. He touched him the second time because of a completely different problem. And I don't know about you, but I would say, okay, I stay here tonight and say, Lord, if you want to touch me tonight, touch me. If you want to touch me later on, touch me later on. If you want to touch me tomorrow morning, tomorrow at lunch, tomorrow night, next week, next month, you touch me as long as you need to touch me. But Lord, don't forget about me. Lord, don't leave me hanging here. Touch me as many times as you need to touch me. But he touches him again. And on the second time, he made him look up. When the man looked up, the Bible said that he saw clearly. Could it be? And I'm not trying to do house cleaning. Could it be? Someone please hear me, because I think we've all been guilty of this. Could it be that some of us, we never get our spiritual focus, Pastor, because we've always got our head down. We've always got our head down. While Jesus time and time again says to get your eyes on me. He tells you to look unto me. I'm the author and the finisher of your faith. But instead, we choose to keep our head down, feeling sorry for ourselves, constantly feeding our mind that God doesn't care about me, constantly filling our head with the belief that we're not good enough, constantly cluttering our thoughts that our time has passed and that we serve no purpose. Learning to walk without clarity and settling for an out-of-focus walk with God to the point that it feels normal. But what did it say again in verse 25? It said that after that, Jesus put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly. Now, if we read this correctly, and Brother Copeland, correct me tomorrow morning with a text if I'm out of line or if I'm wrong here. The human Bible over here. Now, if we read this correctly, it said that once he looked up, he saw every man clearly, which means he saw Jesus clearly. which means he saw himself clearly. And what it doesn't say here, but I want to make sure it doesn't get overlooked, is that when your vision becomes clear, someone please get this. When your vision becomes clear, it is confirmed by what you stop seeing. Think about it. When your vision becomes clear, it's confirmed by what you stop seeing. So when your vision is clear and your eyes are on Jesus, you'll stop seeing your faults. You'll stop seeing your problems. You'll stop seeing your past. And Jesus goes on to tell him to go back down and go to the town, go where you came from. He said, listen, don't miss the point here. Jesus does not give vision for where you've been. He gives vision for where you're going. I'm going to say it one more time. Jesus does not give vision for where you've been. He gives vision for where you're going. And I've said all this, and you can stand. I've said all this to try and convey this simple little thought tonight. For someone that's been struggling while in the middle of a process. Struggling, wondering why God hasn't come through for you yet. Struggling with why you haven't seen that God-given promise come to pass. Struggling, wondering if God can still fix what is broken in your life. Something that is not mentioned in this passage tonight. But when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. For him to know what men looked like, and for him to know what trees looked like, tells me that he must have been born with sight. But somewhere along the way, he lost it. And our passage said that they took him to Jesus and he fixed what was broken. Not instantly, but through a process. And I want to tell someone tonight that just because you didn't get your answer or your healing instantly, keep your head up and your eyes on him. Your answer will come. You're just in the process. And tonight as we stand here, I wonder, is there anybody thankful tonight that can be honest enough and lift a hand as we bow our heads or lift your hands, whatever you want to do, and say, God, I'm still here, and I'm still waiting on that promise. I'm still waiting on that healing. I'm still waiting on that word. I'm still waiting and depending on what you told me you was going to do. And yes, I've gotten weary, perhaps. But it's the process.